He dreamed that dream again. He knew it by heart. A girl from Acelia stood before him, furiously beating her chest. Her outfit featured traditional Yogyakarta patterns, but he had only once heard of someone from Acelia becoming part of the Yogyakarta royal family, and that was a man. Such clothes would not be worn by a person not prepared to meet death. She smiled at him slightly mockingly. It seemed that the girl was holding back anger or displeasure. He advised her not to keep the rage inside. She smiled sadly, telling she had always considered herself right, but now it turned out that all her life she had been mistaken and did not know what she was doing. He did not understand what she was saying, but the girl stroked his cheek and promised that she would definitely understand. Just a little later, she tenderly touched his forehead with her lips. Much later, if they meet again. Sapphire blue eyes opened slightly, interrupting the memory. A young man sat up in bed, pressing his palm to his forehead. This dream haunted him again and again, ingrained in his soul, not allowing him to forget it and not letting him get used to it. Somewhere very, very far from this man, a guard gloomily looked at his captive. This was Adrienne Dew, the second child of the Dew family. Now her hands were tied, and she asked the guard to scratch her head. The guard's face showed undisguised disgust. He was clearly glad that his duty did not require him to touch this unwashed captive. Adrienne pointed at Nihil, her fellow sufferer. Actually, he also had a dirty head. If this guard had been to the Eastern Plains, where they had been quite recently, he would not have mistaken the sunburned skin for dirt on the cheeks. The radiance of endless plains of white stone, among which lurk many savages, blinds the eyes and forces one to endure for several days as the scorched skin peels off the scalp. The guard could not properly ask what was bothering him and many others in this city. While he was stumbling, trying to utter the question, Adrienne childishly demanded that her head be scratched again. A clang rang out as the sword passed through the gap between the bars of the grate. Their hopeless dialogue was interrupted by the appearance of Kaylee Dew. The pitiful toothpick did not frighten the girl. She was sure that he lacked neither the courage nor the skill to behead her. He'd better stop jumping around with a sword like that, or he'll break his other leg too, and he'll be hobbling for the rest of his life anyway, paying for that first fracture. Kaylee was furious. The girl behind bars couldn't reach him, and if Prince Ethan really cared about her, he wouldn't have left her to rot in the dungeon. But Adrienne was loyal to her prince and believed that it was the right decision. If he had rushed to rescue her, serious plans could have been wrecked. He can leave the girl in prison for a while, but if she, his right hand, is harmed, then it will be a completely different matter, won't it? She turned the key principle of this country upside down, and the king would not let that go. That's what Keeley believed. She would be punished, despite having won a victory over the savages from the Eastern Plains. Adriana seemed completely unconcerned by her brother's words, and even casually called him a wretch, provoking a flash of anger in him. Okay, let her calm down. She's also injured, she might not fully recover either. No need to be angry at a fellow sufferer. Persuasion did not help, and the sword of the enraged Kaylee nearly fell on the girl. Nikhil could not allow this. He, despite his bound hands, rushed to defend her. Fortunately, the visitor lacked the courage to inflict wounds on the prisoners. He left, leaving behind only words that Ethan would not save the girl who, now crippled, could not even be a normal knight. A knight. People called her Lady Dew, called her Adrienne, but the nickname the Mad Hound of the Second Prince spread the widest. Such treatment came as a shock to the noble family. An equal shock was the disintegration of the Dew family. Even the brother and sister found themselves on opposite sides of the barricades as they favored different heirs. Acelia, a kingdom rich in black water, had been in a state of struggle for the throne for 5 years. Princess Della, who received a blessing from the Temple of Afalara, crushed her enemies in the north. It was to her side that Kaylee defected. Prince Ethan was in poor health, but he not only opposed his sister, but also enriched the kingdom through his agile mind. At the age of 15, he found an application for black water that ignites fire in military affairs. This was a major achievement, but at the reception for his 20th birthday, Della ridiculed her brother. How could an inventor be a king? They were rumored that it was Della, under the patronage of the Temple of Afelar, who was supposed to become the next monarch. But everything changed when Adriana Dew took Prince Ethan's side. She brought the state victory after victory, dedicating each one to her favorite, and was blind, carrying out any of his orders and defending his interests. When she executed a follower of Princess Della right at the palace gates for insulting the second prince, she became his rabid bitch. For this, the girl was sent to fight savages on the scorching eastern plains, but when she returned, bearing victory, she was met not with honors but with ropes. The time for judgment has finally come. The girl's stay in prison was not peaceful, and this was evident from her distressing state. It was clear that Kaylee had undoubtedly had a hand in this. Ethan failed to meet with the king in advance to discuss the situation, but Della didn't manage to do that either, so the chances were equal. A chorus of voices rang out, greeting His Majesty. The king sat down in his place and turned to Adrienne. He called the girl the proud knight of Acela, not a criminal. This did not fit with the fact that the girl's mother had recently been denied admission, but it delighted Ethan. The daughter of the Du clan clearly understood why she stood before the face of justice and not resting at the ball. She promised the Ilak slaves with whom she fought as soldiers that the most worthy of them would be released. This violated the principle of the caste system and the precepts of the god Afeller, according to which the inhabitants of Ilar would never become equal to the Acelians. In her defense, the Duke spoke out. He reminded that the girl had been given only 2,000 soldiers, of whom 1,500 were in the camp by order of the commander, so that only 500 slaves were under her command. But the truth was that this act violated the teachings of the god Afeller. Moreover, only the king had the right to reward slave soldiers. Kaylee's face showed that he was pleased with his sister's humiliation. This was not the first time, and Adriana thought mockingly that nothing had changed over time. According to the precepts of Afeller, the Ilaks are slaves by their very nature and will never be equal to the Acelians. Those who treat them as equals will be executed. However, the Knight of the Du family won a worthy victory. From the first battle in Jakarta until now, it has brought only victories, faithfully serving the state. The king turned to Chancellor Barbate for advice. Here the Princess Della spoke up. Is it fair to ask about Father Adrian's sentence? But he did not intend to defend the girl. She had indeed broken the law, but it was also true that the savages of the rocky plains were not yet fully subjugated, and sending such a talent to the scaffold would be wasteful. Why not send the girl where her powers could be used? It was possible to dress her up as an ordinary knight and make her go through the whole path from the beginning. It was possible to send Martha to search for the criminal, but that would have been ineffective. Finally, it was possible to send to the Regency in Yogyakarta. It's hot and humid there, few would want to go there themselves. Why not send her as a temporary regent replacement to the Teterboro clan? There's nothing to choose from here. Martha's searches are ruled out. What about chivalry? Alfine, head of the Order of Acela, bowed and reported that then they could expect a boost in morale and improvement in the soldiers' skills. But discipline in the unit will definitely suffer. The prince nervously ran his hand through his hair, unpleasant to admit, but she really was a headache for everyone around. The decision was finally made. The king ordered her to go south. Essentially, it was a link to Yogyakarta. Adrienne shuddered. Not the most pleasant news, but not a single muscle twitched on her face. Acela was a powerful state in which the dogma of the celestial god affirmed the authority of the wise king. She subjugated many clans and lands around. Among the defeated states was Yogyakarta, the second homeland of Blackwater and the kingdom of 13 clans. In the northern and central parts of the abundant continent lived the fair-skinned Acelians, and in the south, the swarthy Jogyakartans. The members of their royal family, the Virals, had wings. Due to this appearance, casting a shadow on the bright image of Afellar, Yogyakarta was oppressed the most. Through long years of battles, the hot country was cruelly subjugated. She must go there to help King's appointee Celeste Lu Jogjakarta ascend to the throne. After the appointment, she will also take the position of adjutant for the next 5 years. Celeste Lu. The king personally chose him as his heir after the previous Princess Elmira was taken hostage. And Adrian was going there not even as a regent, but as his deputy. She will take the place of Teterboro Eloy. With all her merits and those of her family, can she not even take her rightful place? The count stepped forward asking the same question. When would she be appointed regent? If she doesn't get this position, she won't be able to return. Della was delighted. If she was thrown out like that, then Ethan would have to fight for the throne without his right hand. Count Riza continued to insist. Yes, she had violated the law, but it had become her feat. At least the framework of punishment should be outlined. It was an attempt to help, but he'd better have kept his mouth shut. Barbara Dew could almost read the king's thoughts, and Adrian had the same ability. The count did not have it, and he was now obviously burying the girl with his persuasions. And the king did not let her down. His decision was such that the girl could return as soon as she found the golden city of Yogyakarta. Ethan grew cold. This place was just a legend, which meant she had to end her life in the south. It was impossible to even say it out loud, for denying the legend was tantamount to denying a feller itself. The denial of a feller is a serious sin. She violated his law, so now she must prove the influence of the Lord even on barbarian land. The king declared that, in case of success, she would earn a promotion to the rank of commander of the knightly order. Well, he does love promotions. And 2 people will go with her. Unable to contain himself, Ethan jumped up. This is simply exile. Now someone will go with her alone, and it will be an Alakian soldier. The residents of Yogyakarta will treat the people from Asela harshly. Hatred has been instilled in them by the policies pursued by the victorious state. Della's face was lit up with genuine delight. Well, even with one companion it won't be so boring for her. Nihil will make good company. The king added, the soldier-slave who took direct part in Adrian's betrayal will be branded. They will brand his tongue so that he never forgets his mistakes until the end of his life. Adrian touched Nihil's face. Sorry. He gently pressed against her palm in response. The girl, about to leave, looked mockingly at her jailer. He hurriedly left the hall, as if afraid that she would knock his head off right there. Before they took her away, Ethan asked to let them talk. Sir Alfin could not refuse the prince this request. When the atmosphere ceased to be too formal, Count Riza finally allowed himself to grimace. How badly she smelled. Of course he had to apologize when Ethan ordered him to stop clowning around. After that the sun should rise in the west. Adrian mockingly demanded that some handsome man be assigned to accompany her on the journey if the count truly regretted his actions. The prince leaned towards the girl, drawing attention and interrupting the argument. But he doesn't need to worry. She's going to Yogyakarta not for the first time, but he should be careful, not eat just anything and watch out for safety. The girl confidently stated, she will not get lost. Ethan unexpectedly ordered her not to eat anything from the ground. He was absolutely serious. She wanted to reach out to him but immediately pulled her hand back, where it was terribly dirty. However, this did not bother the prince. He took her palm in his. If such trifles had bothered him, he would have kicked her out when she was still 19. Then she fried meat in the yard of his palace, picking her teeth with a dirty twig. If he had fired her then, he would have avoided many problems. The prince could not, but Count Riza would have been glad. And again Ethan interrupted the squabble. He raised the girl's hand and reminded her that the seat next to him was still vacant. She grimaced expressively in response to the proposal. Adrian turned to the count. Wouldn't he remind her of her nickname? The mad bitch of the second prince is not the best thing to hear, but still better than a courtesan with a sword. Very well, she would not make him hurl obscenities before the face of a feller. If the prince marries her, he will suffer great damage to his reputation, although he was prepared for this damage. Looking at him, the girl thought, what a worthy prince he is. Of course, the offer is wonderfully advantageous, but she would prefer a king. Let him approach her when he takes the appropriate position. Adriana mocked and joked, saying that she dreamed of becoming a grandmother to 10 grandchildren. Finally, the time came to an end and she was led away. In the end, the last thing Ethan got from his dog was a musty smell on his palm and the dream of being a grandmother who almost became a queen. How very typical of Adrian. Princess Della was drinking wine that evening, listening to a report about how Ethan proposed to his knight. The kneeling servant swore that he himself saw him do it. Not bad at all. Kaylee could not and did not want to believe this. He had never considered her a sister, so as to experience any special feelings on this matter. Della watched the reflections of light on her glass and nodded in agreement. She knew such difficulties firsthand. The closer to the throne, the more difficult. And yet Adrian, even if she had grown up on the street, would not have gone unnoticed. Keeley gritted his teeth and said that such a high opinion of the girl was an honor for their family. Della thought that he must be in dismay, since his hated sister was a step away from the throne. Ethan clearly didn't make the offer for no reason. He never does anything to his own detriment. Who could pose a threat in the upcoming war? Alfane is not so much fighting as clearing the way for the second prince. There's no need to talk about the bunglers from Teterboro. But Adrian is a different matter. How much would it cost to send someone to Yogyakarta? One cannot simply let the girl go. Once Della too had dreamed of it, but only when that country was on her side. But since it no longer belongs to the princess, it would be fair to destroy it. Memories from the orphanage suddenly surfaced in Kaylee's mind. It was enough to just mention Adrian, and again her inner peace was disturbed. But no matter. He already has a broken leg, he'll make a so-so messenger knight. The princess smiled sweetly. Nothing, even without a leg, he perfectly plays the role of her hands. The man bowed, expressing gratitude for such generous praise. Yes, we need to kill Adrian while she's there. It will be easy to shift the blame onto the residents of Yogyakarta. Did Keeley know that initially his sister was supposed to become not a regent, but the ruler's wife? And her father did not wish her even the position of deputy regent, imploring her to give him the position. Ah, what a pity. If Adrian had gotten married, she would have stayed alive. Night fell on Acela. The girl and Nikhil were harnessing the horses. After being branded, Nikhil became even more taciturn. She asked the maids to take care of him as best they could, but there was too little time. The father entered the shed. He calmly said that she had lost to her brother, so she should stop supporting Prince Ethan. But is this a defeat? Victories are achieved through perseverance. She knows this from experience. It is probably too early to speak of defeat. Here, Barbate handed the scabbard to his daughter. Sacred sword of the Dew family. Kaylee doesn't know how to handle it properly, but she will be able to. The girl tremblingly drew the blade from its sheath, gazing at its delicate glow. The last survivor wins. Read the inscription on the blade. Does Barbate not regret taking her in? She is truly grateful that the Dew family took her in. However, she cannot accept her brother. It seems the father did not regret either her or giving the girl the sword. Let Ethan not come for her, and if he does, she'll run away herself. She will cope. For her sake, for the first time in his life, he dared to ask the king for something. He really loves her, more than himself. Yes, she was not that sweet, obedient daughter that many fathers dream of. But he still valued her so much that she could not help but consider herself the best bride for Acela. Even Prince Ethan proposed to her. Any guy will never be good enough for the father-in-law, even if he is the second prince 10 times over. Adrian laughed. Indeed, how could it be worse? Barbate bowed his head. Was this not the last time he would see that laughing face? Princess Della will not leave her alone. In all fairness, in her place, Adrian herself would gladly have taken her own life. At the end, her father advised her to look into Biwan al-Mulk. A long time ago, he went there to conquer Yogyakarta. He remembers well the flames scorching his face. And then it seems that he too saw a vision of the Golden City. He too was once a clueless youth. And now his daughter needs to search for what he once searched for himself. Therefore, she must definitely return and delight this father. The girl did not answer and turned away, covering her face with her hair. She jumped onto the horse as quickly as possible and spurred on. The girl was leaving, and her father was looking at her back. Vague memories surfaced in his mind, but did not fully take shape. His daughter always rode clumsily and stupidly, although she sat in the saddle more firmly than many. Leaving into the night, she bared her teeth, trying to hold back tears. Nikhil's face expressed understanding and sympathy. One cannot cry. It does not befit a knight to shed tears over such trifles. So they set off into the night. The darkness of the distant journey was ready to swallow them, and a month and a half later, one could only dream of the night coolness. They dismounted at the foot of a wingless, armless, and headless statue. Adrian collapsed weakly right onto the ground. She was terribly tired from the journey and from this heat, and the wounded leg caused a lot of trouble. For her, a criminal, no luxurious carriage was allowed, in which one could ride with head held high. Therefore, on the way, they often stopped to give rest to themselves and the horses. Together with the horses, 4 of them, they made an enormous journey to the south. Now one of these horses was pugnaciously chewing on the owner's clothes. At that moment, Nihil descended to the ground, worriedly touching the girl's feet. However, she did not let him do anything and pulled her leg away. He is not her slave. He does not have to do that. And in general, it was she who should have carried him in her arms. Before sending them off, they were given only 3 days, so Nihil had no opportunity to recover from his wounds even a little. She remembered how rumors had spread through the palace about how she had called Casey the lame one. Of course, the servants quickly reported everything to the little brother. What pettiness! Only thinking about oneself when nothing terrible has happened. Distracted from these thoughts, Adrian patted Nihil on the head. Well, how long can he go on if he wants to rest? Let him sit properly. When he finally settled in comfortably as well, the girl noticed there were some minor oddities here. Finally, the young man spoke up to clarify what exactly was strange. Adrian raised her head. She was glad that he had finally stopped being silent. But it seemed the young man was still speaking in such a way that the brand was not visible and even turned away from her. She thought he must have been sold into slavery as a child and did not know about the Viral clan. The Virals were searching for the Golden City. That's what the statue is dedicated to. They say that's where the Black Water originated. Many countries once sought to control this city. But after Acella's last conquest, most of the statues were destroyed. Nikhil looked perplexed. How was this even related? The connection is simple. They belittle the divine status of the god Afelar, for according to legend, the first human to reach the Golden City had wings. It seemed Nihil would be surprised, and even not fully believing. And yet they are heading to Yogyakarta. Their royal family is the Viral people. Adrian asked if Nihil knew how to distinguish them from other residents of Yogyakarta. However, he was not given a chance to think. "Wings," someone said from around the corner. The girl looked around in annoyance. Who was depriving her of her fun? It was a young man with bright blue eyes. He approached closely, looming somewhat threateningly. Adrian even had to hold back Nihil, ready to rush to her defense. And not in vain, the man dropped to one knee, greeting them. It smelled of resin from him. Ordinary bullies don't smell like that. It's the smell of a person who spends a lot of time with weapons. He was remarkably gallant, though he intervened in the conversation, finding it interesting. Moreover, the full version of this legend is a bit dangerous. The legend said that the one who has red wings will reopen the Golden Land and become the king of people. In the sacred scripture of Afalara, it was said about 3 seeds of different colors, from which the Assyrians, Ilays, and Jokyakartians were born. From the golden shimmering seed was born the fair-skinned and red-haired king of men, bearing the flame and ruling over men under the aegis of Afelar. If this legend is to be believed, then the Viral people should rule over humans, not Acela, which is why the legend must be buried. The wings of the statue are probably broken for the same reason. Adrian smiled contemptuously. It didn't matter, for this man would belong to Acela. She even feels a little sorry. The man put his hand to his chest and asked as if about something completely different. Didn't they promise to return her unharmed? To let her go after marriage is not quite the same as letting go in peace. However, are the Acelians not too presumptuous in believing that the princess will be broken and share a bed with one of them? The situation was becoming tense. Nihil grabbed his sword again. It was not supposed to be. Adrian assumed, of course, that someone high-ranking would meet them, but she did not expect to see the crown prince himself. Celeste Lu Yogyakarta appeared in person. She knew who he was, but he, of course, recognized her too. The unfortunate heir to the throne. Long ago, his mother, Princess Isla, set out for Kalahel to perform the inheritance ceremony. There she met an Assyrian man. And they had a son, but the man who claimed to belong to the royal Acela family disappeared. The princess was left alone with the child, and the throne passed to her distant relative Parutuskalu. But he fell in love with Princess Isla, and they had a daughter. The girl had wings just like her mother's, the kind that Celesta the half-blood didn't have. The princess flitted through the palace and, looking at her, everyone recalled the legend of the Golden City. Everyone believed that she would bring happiness and prosperity to the people, but after the conquest of Yogyakarta, she was taken prisoner. She did not go through the inheritance ceremony. The throne can be taken by someone else. The princess must spend 5 years in a cell, get married there, and then return. And for now, the country is ruled by Celeste, or rather his regent. And yet she was almost married off to this man. It's not often that the heir himself comes out to meet someone. To keep the conversation going, Adrian pointed to the elephant they were riding and said that she had seen this animal before. She watched the soldiers provoke it and thought the creature was incredibly ferocious. And it turns out that it can transport people too. She had to explain right away that she had encountered them at the beginning of the war with Yogyakarta. Only after that was she transferred to the Stone Plains. The war had been going on for several years, and despite the formal victory, the situation still remained tense. Celeste said that in fact elephants are initially quite obedient. He knew it well, for he had been on the battlefield many times himself. No matter what, now Adrian had the opportunity to admire this unruly country of eternal summer. The sky here was bright blue. Such were Celeste's eyes too. How was it for him with such eyes here, among the dark-eyed people of the viral tribe? Here the hands of the fellow traveler, who had been sitting on the floor of the wagon all this time, touched the girl's foot. The swarthy beauty's whole appearance expressed the joy of serving. Why give such a high reception to the regent? Besides, this girl is a member of the royal family. Celeste claimed that it should be that way since they were going to spend a lot of time together. He is glad to see Adrian as regent, for the man from Teterboro has an unsavory reputation. But she is essentially an exiled criminal. There is no point in indulging her. She did not expect such obsequiousness from him, so she was even ready to answer a couple of Celeste's questions. He just wanted to know her age, and she just lied a little bit, claiming that she was 17. The silence hung in the wagon. No one believed it. She had to admit that it was a lie and that she was actually 25. Here's the scoundrel he didn't believe. But in reality, he simply knew her age in advance from the report. He just wanted to make sure of something. But why age specifically? Does she look younger? He said no, of course not, without batting an eye. Not a shred of courtesy. In fact, she just reminded him very much of one person, but the age didn't match. Adrian immediately stung him. Was that man just as beautiful as she was? Nikhil's facial expression was too condemning. Yes, she understood. Well, stop looking like that. Celeste silently watched this little squabble. Then he turned away, finally allowing himself to relax his face and get distracted from the guest. They finally arrived. The Acela Palace resembled a fortress. One had to pass through residential quarters and numerous inner fortifications to see the palace buildings. Everything here was different. The palace was completely open and could barely be seen through. Strange, doesn't the royal family worry about their safety? Celeste shrugged. The throne of Viral cannot be inherited simply by killing someone. Closing the topic, Celeste asked the girl who was traveling with them, Sarah, to accompany Adrian and tell her about Yogyakarta. The second daughter of Parutuskal's sister, she knew almost everything about the country. Celeste called Adrian Your Excellency and assigned a princess to her, too much honor. She extended her hand to him for a handshake. The prince smiled strangely. Does she know that in Yogyakarta it's not customary for adults to hold hands? And he touched her palm with his fingers. Well, now he'll have to get used to Acela's customs, said Adrian. And she too will have to get used to the traditions of Yogyakarta, said Celeste. Only lovers can hold hands there. The girl frowned. In a cell, there were quite a few female soldiers, but the atmosphere still remained coarsely masculine. Therefore, she boldly stepped forward and mockingly asked, So the prince fell in love with her? Celeste clearly did not expect such a turn of events. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand in dismay. But what's wrong with that? Didn't he take her hand himself? He clearly underestimated the little limping girl. However, she was ready to strike back twice for one blow. She continued to stick to her line. On the battlefields, even a fleeting passion becomes commonplace. Therefore, she will not condemn a man if he felt attracted to her. The king sent her as regent, but how could she know? Perhaps sometime later they would return together or even as a trio. Celeste was embarrassed and could not utter a word. He hastily unclenched his hands and stepped back. He behaved foolishly, and he should apologize for that. He didn't even let Sarah get a word in, honestly admitting that he had given in to a fleeting desire to joke around. He did not want to offend her in any way. He hopes for her forgiveness. Adrian just waved her hand. She was curious too, no big deal. Finally, they were able to say goodbye. The girl remained standing on the palace steps, looking at his back. And yet she could not understand him in any way. So she remained in the Grandland Palace. It's quite far from the central palace. I wonder who lived here before. Sarah did not answer. She was tying a complex Jogjakarta knot. And why does she avoid talking about it? Sarah confessed. Celeste lived here. He is now the heir to the throne, but previously he shunned attention. He avoided you? but he's such a noticeable man. His position is actually quite delicate. He has the blood of an Assyrian traitor flowing in him. But his mother is the heir to the throne. He is a half-blood without wings, as if not fully formed. In fact, he does not give the impression of a person who would live alone and in seclusion, and the palace itself is not in the best condition. Out of the window, a swamp could be seen. There used to be a lake there, but due to lack of maintenance, the water became polluted. Did Eloy Teterboro live here too? It turns out no, Celeste still lived here then, and Eloy himself first lived in another palace and then moved to the administrative building. The image of the prince, who had recently wandered through these corridors, evoked strange thoughts. And even before the conquest, a princess lived here. Celeste must have had to be very careful. Anyone would have noticed the prince's presence in the palace. But he was often away from the palace, sometimes not returning for half a year. And Sarah herself was not his courtier, but a friend of the princess. Finally, Adrian was dressed, the knot was tied. Sarah deftly changed the subject. And what are their plans if they decide to go and inspect the palace? Sarah's suggestions were quite intriguing. They could go to her acquaintance, the pastry chef. It would be good if they are non-alcoholic. Adrian does not take alcohol in any form. Here, Sarah was a little distracted and looked at Nihil. How should she address him? Looking at him, Adrian remembered all his achievements. Let her treat him like her younger brother. He's not a blood brother, of course, but one found on the battlefield. Keely wouldn't have endured such a strapping blood brother. The dialogue was interrupted. The maid announced that the bathwater was ready. The bathhouses were large and beautiful, tiled. After that, a meal awaited them, and later, a meeting with Lord Teterboro. The girl was treated with care, the water was not so cold. In Eloy's homeland, he was oppressed by his older brothers and father, so it's no wonder he preferred to move away. Of course, he could not behave like a full-fledged ruler. The homeland still controlled him and Yogyakarta. Oh, how I didn't want to go. But there's no point in suffering. The visit will have to be made anyway. I wonder why this braggart didn't come out to meet her in person. Sarah handled the intricate knot quite quickly this time. They had time left. Why don't they then take a walk to that swamp? Sarah was terribly against it. She had just washed and changed into clean clothes. But Adrian didn't see a big problem in this. In another palace, Celeste strolled along the corridors. He came across a little tigress Maya. She was quite friendly and rubbed her nose against his fingers. It was pleasant, but one had to remember that she could also bite. Since the fall of Yogyakarta, many have been executed. The Assyrians turned out to be much more cruel than the supposedly warlike representatives of the viral. Celeste was distracted from her thoughts by a woman's voice coming from above. This was Elmira, who had not yet departed for Acela. She heard about the arrival of the new regent. Interesting rumors are circulating about her. Celeste thought, probably that it was she who once arranged a massacre on the battlefields. No, about her hitting on others and deliberately getting captured. At least that's what the maids whispered. Elmira said that she briefly visited the land palace to scout out what was going on. She already knew all about how only lovers can hold hands in Yogyakarta. Was that what he had said back then? Should she not wait for her little sister from Acela? Elmira would be glad if he married an Assyrian woman. Then she wouldn't have to get married into that country. But it's just a joke. He hasn't forgotten his first love yet. And there's no point in arguing. It's definitely love, since he sees her every day in his dreams. In general, he didn't call her for that. He wanted to talk about Ella Teterboro. But Elmira rather abruptly interrupted him. Didn't he really know how to deal with him? He is hardly that stupid. After a year in the role of heir to the throne, he should know what to do. He is now the king, though the ceremony has not yet been held. Everyone knows that he is the king without ceremony. Kamain, who ruled earlier, did not have great power. People extolled Elmira. It was she who ruled, it was she who bowed before Acela. And now it's his turn to take power into his own hands. He should have learned to stand on his own feet and control that girl from Acela. And there's no need to be afraid that he will make a mistake. This is the fate of the clan, it cannot be avoided. What he became king, what the birds disappeared from the Red Valley, all this is the fate of the clan. He must lead the country. He should get used to being independent, then she can calmly get married. Although she didn't expect him to try to get married before her, as much as possible there was nothing like that. So what is he going to do? To begin with, he planned to meet with his predecessor. He had to ask him to arrange his sister's marriage well. Celeste changed the subject and asked how old she was. Was he in his right mind? How could he forget such a thing? However, there was a reason for that princess, the woman from his dreams. And he still says it's not love? He even calls her princess. All right, enough of him stalling. The girl lifted Maya, persuading Celeste to answer. In fact, the regent simply resembles that woman. The same golden hair, the same figure. In fact, Celeste had been gathering information about the future regent since the moment he learned of his likely arrival. Is it possible that the members of the Du family will swallow up Yogyakarta? Or do they simply want to replace him, the inept ruler? However, it turned out that the reason was the need to exile the rebel somewhere. If Yogyakarta is not so necessary for them, then why did they capture it? He would have preferred that the new ruler wallow in luxury, caring about nothing. He remembered again the moment when he first met Adrian. She had the same face as the woman from his dreams, but her eyes were not as kind. This is not the princess who saved him 10 years ago. This is not the warm gaze of the princess, then stunning him with her power. Therefore, the regent is definitely not her. And the age difference is too great. They can't even figure out if Adrian had an older sister, because for the Du family, the girl is not a biological daughter. In any case, Elmira wished him luck in finding true love among these two. In the end, they will now have to build friendly relations with the Assylians. Celeste said gloomily that in that case, even an Assylian son-in-law would do. For Adrian, the time had finally come to go to Lord Teterborough. A carriage awaited her, which was to be drawn by 4 young men. But the girl was not going to ride on other people's shoulders and break other people's knees in order to spare her own. Nihil is the one who really needed a rest. A small quarrel ensued between them. Adriana insisted that he should finally recover completely, while he insisted that he wanted to accompany her. Their dialogue was interrupted by the phrase that one should take care of one's knees from a young age. Otherwise, in old age, one will have no shortage of problems with them. It was Celeste who led the horse to them. They definitely cannot go on foot. The capital of Yogyakarta is not so large compared to Asella, but only compared to it. So Sarah had to prepare Adrian's horse as well, the one she had arrived on that morning. For Nikhil, the girl had a personal assignment. He had to rest for at least 10 days. And if he disobeys, she will impose a terrible punishment on him. Without listening to his objections, the girl mounted her horse. Celeste looked up at her, once again recalling his princess. He should have distracted himself from this and also mounted a horse. On the way, he thought about how the residents of Yogyakarta had always been well disposed towards the viral people. Their palace was so close to ordinary houses that it almost merged with them. But Celeste was ignored as if showing no favor. It seems this has turned into mere mockery of the poor prince, lest the hatred for this handsome man touch her herself. He is quite stubborn. She should not test his patience and cross the line. The rustle broke the silence, asking what this terrible punishment was that Nihil could have earned. This punishment is a vacation for an extra 10 days. But why would the prince be interested in the relationship between a foreigner and some slave? She also had questions. All the way she didn't understand how to address him and still doesn't understand. She said she wanted to hear how Lord Teterborough addressed the prince, but Celeste showed no enthusiasm, though he did not dispute it. Until that moment, she had actually been quite familiar with him, although Celeste thought that her status was higher, and she had the right to do so. And in response to the call to be honest, he replied that in Asella's history there were undoubtedly many who were executed for honesty. Adrian suddenly felt a sense of déjà vu. Ah yes, it was she who usually snapped like a dog. Okay, if you think about it, it's already good that he's not waving a sword in front of her. Lord Alphen showed no great favor towards her audacity. He kept trying to intimidate her enough to make her start behaving properly. Well, intimidating Celeste clearly won't work. In the end, she suggested that the prince speak freely and sincerely. The girl sweetly suggested to the older brother to speak frankly. He broke out in a cold sweat. Yes, Celeste had allowed her to address him as she wished, but not like that. And she kept going on. It's all Kaylee Dew's bad influence, definitely. But Celeste already had a sister who beat him up. He would have liked the new one to be nicer. She coquettishly called the prince her elder brother again, making him blush and plead for her to stop. How should I address him then, if that's not acceptable? Everything will suit him except for this terrible option. Unfortunately, her question remains unanswered for now. It seems the rabid bitch of the second prince is insane in many aspects. Finally, they reached Lord Teterborough. How did he address the prince? He called him a half-breed hybrid. And Adrian he called the not-proud second daughter of the Dew family. Well, that's a warm welcome. Teterborough hypocritically rejoiced at the luck of meeting her here in Livrim. It was evident from the man's appearance that his health had severely deteriorated. But he did not fail to notice that the girl had already managed to put on some rags. Teterborough himself was in Assylian clothes, in which it was simply insanely hot. Adrian reminded herself that she was kind and generous and should forgive his foolishness. But this insolent man knew no bounds, and why was it that she had not married, not dressed in silks, and not spent her time at home in quiet and idleness? It would be interesting to see how generous it would be to wring his neck. In fact, once the Teterborough and Dew families were on the same level, but with Barbate's acquisition of the chancellorship, a rift arose. None of the Teterborough children were perfect, but the Dew children were quite worthy. The youngest, Eloy, was constantly compared to Adrian. No wonder he disliked her. And he kept going on. What had she turned into now, when she had rejected all worthy suitors and clung to the prince? But he nobly believes that she is capable of managing such an insignificant country. And did she have time to look around this disgusting area? No great loss. The regent's face showed self-satisfaction, so she came running to him right away. Ha! However, she was no longer inclined to be courteous with him and confidently held out her hand, demanding that he hand over the regent's seal. This demand clearly did not please the Assylian. The regent's seal secured all documents sent to Asella. Moreover, it possessed the blessing of a feller and could, for example, prevent a stranger from opening an envelope. Adrian kindly informed that such haste was quite appropriate. The lord should take care of his health, for he will need strength to set off for Asella in 2 months. Changing the subject, Eloy turned to the hybrid prince again. Did he find out about the snake Bivan al-Maraka? Of course he found out. It was a huge snake as thick as a tree and longer than 20 adult men. She is quite difficult to catch, and people who have tried to do so have already suffered. Adrian listened with a gloomy face as Eloy protested. How was he supposed to recover? Or did they want to burden the princess with caring for him? In this hot and humid climate, it's not easy for the Assylian, and the local disease has caused their whole body to swell up. It's hard for them to move. However, it is said that on Kalakala lives a snake whose tail has healing properties. For a month now, the heir has been unable to fulfill even such a small request, and he himself should not even try, for he is ill. Adrian coldly noted that he still looked quite vigorous. In any case, said the lord, he cannot just take and immediately hand over the affairs to a weary person. The girl returned to the previous topic again, but that snake must be difficult to catch. Besides, such stories often turn out to be fiction or exaggeration. He'd better consult an Assylian doctor. If she wants it that way, then let her prove to him herself that this story is a lie. This stubborn, stupid dog, however, little could compare with Salet's utterly hateful gaze. Suddenly, Adrian remembered the time of war on the rocky plain, when the barbarians furiously tried to destroy the statue of a feller. They probably knew that the Assylians especially valued his teachings. And she also remembered her father, who had advised her to visit Bivan al-Murk herself. That snake is right from there. Recently, Eloy demanded that the Yogyakartans catch her, but this hybrid failed to cope even with such a simple task. She interrupted him, offering her help in searching for and capturing the legendary monster. But for some reason, the lord was not happy with such a prospect. Her leg hurt, she had just arrived from the road, and they were comrades after all. He should not condemn her to such tiring labors. Her patience finally snapped. Yes, when physical strength leaves a person, it becomes difficult for them to observe decorum. But this in no way justifies his contemptuous attitude towards the prince. Yes, it is said in the houses that the Yogyakartans are of lower status, but let Afla Lara not heed the words of this fool denigrating his teachings. For God has endowed people with reason so that they can interpret his words correctly, although perhaps it was only the illness that clouded the Lord's mind, who in reality did not wish to insult Celeste and the whole country along with him. Her bold tone shocked the prince himself. He had never defied Teterborough. She did not insult him. There is no need to be indignant. The bias against him will be transferred to her, who needs that. Such is reality. But even in this case, Eloy decided that since others had lost their dignity and allowed themselves to treat an entire people with contempt, then he too was permitted to do so. He clenched his teeth angrily. Look, it seems she doesn't even think about repentance. He will have to report this. Her face was indifferent, and the Lord could no longer squeeze anything more out of himself. So, they left the premises of the residence. It seems there's a little problem. Celeste uttered a quiet, "Thank you," and she took it for granted. He was even surprised by such a reaction, although, come to think of it, she had always been unpredictable. This snake is a sacred creature of Kalahala. In the Red Valley of Bivan Almerk on Mount Kalahal, the inauguration ceremony of the new kings of Yogyakarta takes place. They say a sacred power is hidden there, and that is why even those who live nearby try not to wander onto the mountain unless absolutely necessary. But that's not the whole story. The Teterboro disease is actually caused by nothing more than overexertion. There is no need to catch a snake. However, it was decided to begin the spread of a feller's teachings from Yogyakarta. The local small peoples could be united around Kalahal. Therefore, they try to blur the pronounced local flavor. For Eloy, killing the snake is an excellent way to stand out. But Celeste decided not to voice it. This woman is an Assylian, and clearly not the one he remembers. The eyes he remembers open like a flower when they look at him. Adrian decided to clarify what Teterboro meant by saying that the princess would have to take care of him. It seems he hopes to take the princess as his wife and return to Yogyakarta as the ruler. One foolish thing after another. And should he learn to communicate with the regent who expresses himself in this way? In the end, he did not utter a single word throughout the entire journey. Adrian finally asked if the princess herself wanted to get married, but then she pulled herself up short. If she had wanted to, she would have been married long ago. The girl decided to gather soldiers to go hunting for the snake with them. However, it was not so simple, for the military of Yogyakarta acted in their own way. They ignored the old regent. Why should they listen to the new one? But an army without unquestioning obedience is no more than a pack of dogs. Yes, and Eloy had accumulated many tasks, the construction of the temple of a feller and meetings with local tribes. But for now they have to go uphill. This girl is undoubtedly an Assylian, but why is she behaving not as an Assylian girl should? It would be easier to understand if she were pedantic or rigidly principled, but she is not like that. And definitely not a good and innocent one if she immediately offers to spend the night together. She could have been angered by the actual refusal to provide an army, but she is completely calm. But she simply thanked him for accompanying her today. Suddenly yielding to an impulse, Celeste grabbed the girl by the edge of her clothing. She didn't seem too surprised, she just asked what was going on. He could not understand her in any way, and the girl mockingly said that young people who cannot clearly express their thoughts usually have difficulty confessing their love. Perhaps he realized his love for the beautiful Assylian woman too late? This woman seems to think about only one thing. He heard that she had arrived with orders for the complete conquest of Yogyakarta but she interrupted him. Was he really trying to say that she should ignore all the condemnations of the Jakartans and quietly plunder the country, as Teterboro had done? Of course he became the heir to the throne recently, but how can one be so naive? She has completely different motives. She raised the question again of how to address him, and he didn't like the option, older brother, again. Maybe it's better by name? They say that's where love begins. The Russell sounds great, better than master and little brother. And she just left, leaving him with a strange feeling of closeness to something familiar. They went uphill on local sheep. Adrian chattered with her steed, as if it understood her, scolding it for the unpleasant smell. She, the regent, must know their names. The one she's riding is Raflon. But the local names are so complicated that they immediately slip out of her mind. He had learned about this woman only a couple of days ago, and here he was already asking his sister if he could go accompany her in the mountains. He had problems because of Uncle Kamain and his inept rule. Was that why he was trying to get closer to the new guest? Well, how long can you keep teasing him? There are many reasons to get closer to the new regent. Although the thought of fraternizing with those who had conquered his country still troubled him. Moreover, wasn't Adriana hitting on him in every conversation? But how similar she was to his princess. All night he was kept awake by a feeling of déjà vu. Frivolous but sharp-tongued. Could she be the sister of that very woman? Perhaps he will manage to find some clue. And going out to meet her before leaving for the mountains, he immediately heard the question, was he sure that he didn't like her? He had to say that he already had a loved one. His thoughts were interrupted by a new question. There was no path in the mountains, and Adrian was clarifying whether they would have to go on foot. Yes, halfway they will have to part with the lambs. Useless jumps are not the best idea in the mountains, and it certainly won't do Nihil's sore knees any good either. Adrian asked if Celeste, the heir to the throne, didn't have a multitude of affairs. Where did he find the time to accompany her? Elmira had not yet departed for Acela, and he was inexperienced, so for now he could not do without her help. It was a lie, but why should she know the truth? Better let her think about this. Isn't she overdoing it, considering that she's also wounded? Unexpectedly, Adrian replied that yes, she was indeed overdoing it. He expected to hear something like, "Such a trifle is no obstacle for a knight," and she knew it. But she wasn't joking when she said she really values sincerity. In these mountains, on the fourth highest peak, there was a pond next to which a snake lived, so there was still a long way to go. Generally, when encountering a snake, one should start praying to avoid misfortune, but once a man, out of fright, threw an axe at the snake, and it slithered away, leaving part of its tail behind. They say that young man gave it to his father. Finally, they arrived in the village where this story was born. The man with the covered head joyfully headed towards Celeste as soon as he saw him. For the 5 huts, the name village was not quite suitable, but there was no choice. They had to explain why they had come. The men showed friendliness towards each other and hostility towards Teterboro with his demands. The man, however, did not mind the death of this snake. Adrian even asked Sarah if Celeste was really a prince, but it turned out that he had reasons to behave so familiarly. Sarah also turned out to be acquainted with this person. It seems everyone here had rather close relationships. And Celeste behaved completely differently, was not like himself, as he was at the meeting with Lord Eloy. Together they went to have lunch, discussing where they could find a snake. The owner turned out to be quite hospitable. The man mentioned a grandmother who was constantly praying by a boulder, behind which one should look for a snake. Go around to the left, there will be a body of water nearby. Wait, what kind of grandmother is that? Celeste gave her a strange look when those words were spoken, but then turned away and continued the dialogue as if nothing had happened, as if deliberately ignoring her lack of understanding. The local looked at Adrian with suspicion. Why would the Acelians be looking for a snake? One can die, after all. Hunting is not safe. Misfortunes can pour out like from a horn of plenty, and one cannot eat it. Adrian immediately clarified, really, if an Acelian eats a snake, will he die? The man hastened to explain that this fate would befall a person of any nationality. At that moment, Celeste was convincing himself that the girl would not execute the innocent uncle. The man explained, "Indeed, there are rumors that the father of one local boy ate a snake's tail and got back on his feet. However, 3 days later he fell ill again. Many thought that he had died after all. And then he seemed to have risen from the dead, but was very weak. And that was not all." But why didn't this part of the story spread? The man hesitated before answering, and for some reason asked Celeste if the guest was married. This outraged her, but did it bother anyone? In any case, he simply whispered the truth to the prince's ear. In general, in any case, they should not have eaten the snake, and it was definitely not worth hunting it then. Adrian asked what was the matter, but Celeste turned away to Nihil and hesitated somehow. The embarrassment was evident to the naked eye. Therefore, the regent asked him to tell the truth, so that he could then pass it on to her, if for some reason it would be easier for someone. For some reason, Celeste explained everything to him without any problems, even though the man was not thrilled. He was also a very young man. He didn't need such details. He returned to Adrian with an unchangingly calm face. What on earth is going on there? However, as she listened, her own face changed. The girl even asked incredulously, "What? Did she hear everything correctly?" As a result, the regent burst out laughing, very pleased with the information received. They must definitely feed this to Lord Teterboro. Sarah alone remained uninitiated, whom they decided not to take on the hunt and leave in the village with the sheep, in order to pick her up on the way back. No, after all, no matter what happens, they must pass the snake Aloya. Sarah was in shock. What kind of story was that? And most importantly, why wasn't anyone telling her? She also wanted to go, but the local uncle held her back. There's no need to poke your nose where you can say goodbye to life if you can sit peacefully with snacks. At parting, the mysterious grandmother was mentioned again. Who is this? Are there any other members of the royal family that Adrian hasn't met yet? What other surprises await her? Actually, Adrian first met the monster when she was peacefully conversing with a scout on the rocky plains. In a cell protected by a feller, there were no monsters, and they did not approach the gathering of warriors during campaigns either. That monster resembled a lizard the size of 2 adult men and spat venom, effectively driving away those who were not prepared for such a surprise. It was certainly different from the spiritual beings of Kalahal, Celeste thought. The local spirits were amazingly unique in general. But Adrian considered any creature that brought evil to people a monster, and an encounter with this snake promised problems, so what was the point of calling it a spiritual being? In any case, she then observed and found out that the lizard moved well in a straight line, but turned slowly. This statement alarmed Celesta. Weren't the soldiers a decoy? Nikhil was there too. He was always with her whenever possible, and his merits on the battlefield were hard to enumerate. Ilakian. There were various rumors about their origin. For example, someone claimed that they came out of the water, but it was known for certain that the Ilakians hated the Assyrians even more than the people of Yogyakarta. And yet the slaves still followed her into that battle. But why did they not hate her? Then, while she distracted the monster, Nihil successfully attacked it, and they dealt with it together. No matter how they won, the essence of the story was that monsters mostly repeat the behavior of the animals they originated from. They should not be underestimated, but there is no point in seeing them as intelligent beings. But this monster must be something different. Herbalists told different stories about it. There were many legends. However, in reality, it is usually deserted up there on the mountain. That's why the soldiers refused to go with them, and they didn't even try to find a local guide. All this is not so much because of the snake, but because of the succession ceremony. The snake itself is not very dangerous, although an encounter with it portends great misfortunes. At first, Adrian thought that Celeste was called a half-blood and rejected because of his mixed origins. But perhaps this was due to the ceremony itself, for the throne was passed on in a special way, not by bloodline at all. As far as she knew, to become the head of state, it was enough to simply come from the viral clan. But how does this ceremony actually take place? Adrian is from another country. Local customs are a mystery to her. What exactly is she interested in? It's not quite clear, since she already knows that Celeste didn't pass her. In any case, he is not just an uninformed youngster, and she is from another country and knows nothing about local customs, so, in fact, everything is interesting. And he looked completely different from how he had at the meeting with Teterboro, much friendlier and more cheerful. And yet yesterday he had seemed ready to tear apart one particular Asellan and all of Acela along with him. Perhaps he's just pretending to be good in front of her. In any case, the initiation ceremony is an encounter with the Firebird. Members of the viral clan set out for the Sacred Valley and spend some time there until one of them encounters her. Usually this is given 7 days from the start of the rainy season. It turns out that the bird decides who will rule the country. In response to this, Celeste said somewhat discontentedly that the Assyrians always react like that, but local customs should not be underestimated. No, she didn't mean that. She wasn't mocking at all. It was just an unusual turn of events. Yogyakarta was populated by many small peoples who lived in harmony, but were little immersed in each other's cultures and customs. The dialogue was interrupted. It seems they encountered a snake a little earlier than expected. Huge black scaly rings twisted in front of them. So this is what the legendary snake looks like. And yet meeting her is an omen of failure, especially when it happens during the day. It's interesting what to expect now. Adrian looked at Celeste. He folded his arms and looked as if he wasn't going to fight. Did he just come all this way for nothing? The girl drew her sword. Special methods are required to battle this monster. She will have to try hard today and employ not only physical skills but also cunning. To defeat such a creature, one decisive blow is required, but in her current imperfect state, it will not be easy for her to do so. Adrian had only one option left: For example, one could plunge a sword into the snake's eye, stun it with that, and then finish it off. Perhaps no one would even get hurt. Then she will be able to cope on her own. But this is still a very positive scenario. Adrian stepped forward resolutely. The snake did not start thrashing about randomly, as expected, and behaved quite reasonably. There was more human in it than in other monsters. But she didn't get her place with the prince for nothing either. Years of battles and service in the garrison don't go to waste. The rabid bitch will be able to tear the throat out of anyone who asks for it. Although a snake's body will not be as easy to cut as human necks. She cannot run properly, and the wounded nickel will not help either. But she will manage. The maw opened right above the girl, enveloping her in a foul stench. And she plunged the blade straight into the red sky. And it turned out not so easy to pull it out. But it was necessary even if she got hurt by the tusk. After all, it was the sword of her family, an immense value. The girl's hands were covered by others, surprisingly strong. Celeste pulled her back, helping to pull out the blade. They fell right on top of each other, but at least they were alive. She threw back her head, looking at the prince either displeased or surprised. However, his face was concerned and even handsome. Interesting. What was he thinking? Why did he save? The girl tried to jump up and felt a sharp pain pierce her leg. He should not interfere in someone else's hunt. Let him stay out of it. And she confidently, as if nothing had hurt her, plunged the sword into the black rings of the serpent's body, piercing the scales. This woman, absolutely not the princess he knows. But why are they so similar now? Nikhil approached her and wiped the blood from her face with his clothes. He took care of her, though he did not have the opportunity to engage in battle on equal terms. Celeste looked on in surprise at this care from the side and did not interfere. Adrian looked much softer and more tender than usual, gratefully accepting the help. Who is she? Does she have the tenderness that his princess had? The next day, Adrian woke up after sunrise. Her hands were scratched and weak. If you think about it, they haven't held a sword for quite a while. First the imprisonment, then the long journey. Of course, she lost all her dexterity. I tried so hard not to die, and here's the result. And Celeste's hands were surprisingly strong. She could not forget how they enveloped her weak palms at that moment. His eyes showed bewilderment, as if he himself did not expect to rush to her rescue. The rustle. How to understand this enigmatic man?